One Sunday afternoon, a little girl disappeared from a church class, and no one saw who she left with. The door to the bell tower was locked. The air was still. Everyone assumed she wandered off until one child whispered a line no one could forget. And when they opened the tower, they found something that shattered the town's silence and its faith. In the early spring days, the old neighborhood near Chester Park always possessed an unnameable gentleness. Red bricks were covered in moss, rows of maples began to sprout new leaves, and the old steps seemed to record the footprints of time from the previous century. In a small house nestled amidst that row of buildings, a 6-year-old girl with hair as golden as the morning sun sat on the second-floor balcony, clutching an old book tightly, her head tilted slightly toward her grandfather. "Grandpa, why do pigeons like to stay in high places?" Mabel asked, her clear eyes looking up, her voice as light as a passing breeze. Her grandfather chuckled, setting his teacup down on the small wooden table beside him. "Because up high they can see everything below. It's safer, you see, dear." Mabel was silent for a moment, then looked down at the page of the book, where there was a picture of a bell tower. "So, do we have to climb really high to see the bird looking at us?" He simply smiled, gently stroking her head. Mabel was like that, always asking questions that made adults pause and think, and then break into a smile, not necessarily because they had an answer, but because they felt a little lighter. That evening, the family gathered around the simple dinner table, enjoying the hot soup her mother, Emily, had cooked and the crusty bread her grandfather had baked. Mabel's mother, a primary school teacher, recounted stories from her class about a student who forgot the poem but remembered the names of every bird she'd mentioned. "Mabel, would you like to go to Sunday school with me this week?" The little girl, who was nibbling on a piece of bread, brightened up. "Yes, I'd love to. The teacher in class told us about the shepherd searching for the lost sheep. I remember it so well." That evening, Aunt Augusta, Emily's younger sister, came to visit. She brought a beige fabric bag, inside which was the white dress with pink trim that she had promised to sew for Mabel since last year. When a girl grows up, she must learn to dress beautifully. But she must also know how to protect herself, you know. Mabel frowned. She didn't quite understand, but she nodded anyway. Then she ran over to hug her aunt, smiling innocently. "I promise I'll be beautiful, but I don't know who is strange." Everyone laughed. The joyous laughter seemed to dispel even the dark corners that adults sometimes sensed but couldn't articulate. Aunt Augusta looked at Mabel's mother, silently exchanging a look as a reminder. She nodded very slightly. Part 2. That night, before going to sleep, Mabel lay in bed, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Outside, a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and orchids from the garden. Emily took out an old storybook and began to tell a story in a gentle voice. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Eloise. One day, while playing at the edge of the village, Eloise was swept away by a great wind. People searched and searched, but they couldn't find her. They put up pictures of her everywhere. But then, one spring morning, when the church bells rang for the first time in months, Eloise walked out of the forest. She returned, as if she had never left. Mabel was silent. She didn't ask any questions, nor did she praise the story as usual. After a long moment, her voice rang out, small as a thread. "If I went missing, would you come looking for me?" Her mother was slightly startled. She turned to look at her daughter. In the dim golden light, that small face was neither sad nor afraid, just waiting for an answer, a sincere answer. Emily smiled. Not because the question was so innocent, but because it was like a mirror reflecting her own heart. "I'll search for you my whole life if I have to, and if you're anywhere that bells ring, then I'll hear you." Mabel nodded lightly. She closed her eyes, hugging the book to her chest. Just a few minutes later, the even breaths of her sleep could be heard. Her mother still sat there, gently stroking the soft golden hair. The nightlight remained softly lit. Outside, the wind still whispered through the window pane. Somewhere far away, there was a very faint ringing of bells, not enough to wake anyone, but enough to sow a nameless melancholy in the heart of a mother. Sunday morning dawned with a sky as if it had been cleansed after a light rain. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the window cracks, lightly caressing the pillow, then touching Mabel's braid. She opened her eyes in silence, her first movement to turn and look at the white dress with pink trim that was carefully hung on the closet door. A smile blossomed on her lips even before her little feet touched the ground. Mabel dressed herself, a little clumsily but full of determination. The dress was a bit long, the hem still uneven, but she was determined not to let her mother have to fix it. Then, the little girl opened the drawer, taking out her favorite book, a children's version of the Bible, the spine worn but still kept clean. Part 3. Downstairs, Aunt Augusta was already waiting. She wore a crossbody bag and a white fabric hat, looking hurried but still gentle when she saw Mabel coming down the stairs. "Goodness, you look like an angel today, sweetheart." Mabel laughed, blushing, then took her aunt's hand. Her mother stood at the door, her eyes filled with both pride and concern, lightly scanning her daughter's face. "Be good at Sunday school. Remember to sit near the teacher. Don't go with anyone you don't know, okay?" "I remember." Aunt Augusta and Mabel left the house, the light yellow morning sun casting shadows of the two small figures fading away on the stone-paved road. War Street Baptist Church wasn't large, but it was ancient and solemn. Each brick, each stained glass window seemed to hold a part of the memories of generations that had passed through. As soon as she reached the gate, Mabel looked up. The bell tower stood tall in the sun, and in that moment, her eyes held a strange, dreamy look. "Auntie, are there really pigeons up there?" "Yes, but there's a lot of poop too. The smell isn't pleasant." Mabel giggled, then looked up again. She didn't necessarily want to see the birds. She just wanted to go up there once, like Eloise in the story last night. Also disappeared, then returned from a place far away. Her aunt led her inside, signed her name on the attendance sheet, and then left the little girl with the group of children. The teacher that day was Sister Ruth, slender, with a voice as soft as rustling leaves. Mabel sat in the second row, next to a little girl about her age. When she saw her friend struggling with her shoelaces, Mabel bent down to help tie them, her hands clumsy but patient. Later, during recess, the little girl took out a snack from her bag, broke it in half, and shared it with her friend. "Why don't you keep more for yourself?" Sister Ruth asked as she walked by. "Because she eats slowly. If she is still hungry and I'm full, that would be strange." The answer made Sister Ruth pause for a moment. After a while, she stroked Mabel's head, then continued to walk around the class. There was something in her eyes, a very light, very real emotion, but Mabel didn't notice. She was just looking at the wall clock, counting down until she could see her mother again. The lesson continued with storytelling about the shepherd who found the lost sheep. Mabel really liked that part. She raised her hand to speak. "I think if the shepherd is too tired, then God will go look instead." The whole class laughed, but Sister Ruth pursed her lips, her eyes welling up with tears. No one noticed, except for a child sitting at the back of the class, who was silently watching Mabel as if recording that image in her memory. Later, he was one of the first to say that Mabel had sat upright, attentively, and hadn't seemed sad or worried at all. Part 4. 3:30 p.m. Aunt Augusta returned, just as planned. She entered the hall, her shoes tapping on the stone floor. The atmosphere was still peaceful. A few children were lining up to get their coats. She looked around. "Where's Mabel?" she asked a little boy. "She's not here." At first, no one saw anything unusual. Sister Ruth also thought that Mabel might be in the restroom or had just run out to the playground in the back. Aunt Augusta walked around the church. She couldn't find her. 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Her aunt began to worry. Her heart churned, not understanding why it was beating so fast. She opened her phone to check the time, then texted Mabel's mother with just one sentence. "She's not out yet." Sister Ruth went to call for help. A few other parents also joined the search. The name, Mabel, was called out repeatedly, echoing through the narrow hallways, reverberating into an unpleasant echo. In the corner of the wall near the stairs to the tower, a little boy about 5 years old was sitting hugging a pillow. His face was pale, his eyes wide, as if about to cry. Aunt Augusta bent down. "Have you seen Mabel?" The boy didn't answer immediately. He shivered, then whispered, very softly, as if afraid of his own words. I saw her go with someone." Her aunt paused. Who? Who was it?" The boy looked around, as if afraid of being punished. After a while, he murmured, "I don't know." But the person said, "Come up here, little girl. I'll show you the pigeons." Aunt Augusta felt a chill down her spine. A cold wave ran down her spine. She stood up abruptly. Up the tower? Why would anyone be up there? Sister Ruth turned pale. She turned to find the church manager. In that moment, peace vanished like smoke. The calls began to get louder, carrying panic and worry. Footsteps began to run hurriedly. No one could maintain the composure that was typical of a Sunday afternoon. In a corner of the empty classroom, Mabel's book was still on the table. The pages were turned open by the wind, right at the passage about the lost sheep, and the quote, "I will seek her, though I have to cross 100 mountains." No one saw it, but something, a small thing, had begun to break in the atmosphere, silently like cold withdrawing from the heart. And from that moment, no one could ever return to a normal Sunday afternoon. Part 5. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe Mabel ran out to the yard. Maybe she followed another friend into the activity room. All assumptions were mentioned, gently, then hurriedly. A small girl, white dress with pink trim, who was supposed to be here, now vanished from the familiar church. Aunt Augusta began to ask loudly, her voice broken, "Who saw her last? Mabel, where are you, Mabel?" A group of adults scattered to look around. Some went to the restrooms. Some ran to the parking lot. The young pastor hurried down the second-floor hallway, calling down, "There's no one up here." At that moment, a little boy hiding in the corner of the stairs, trembling, tugged at his mother's sleeve, saying quietly enough for only her to hear, I heard someone on the bell tower." The boy's mother froze. Then she turned around abruptly, calling out, "Who has the key to the tower? Is there anyone?" No one really remembered who shouted first, but within 2 minutes after that sentence, the whole church seemed to explode. Calls, the sound of shoes tapping on the tiles, the sound of pounding hearts. Aunt Augusta stood as if turned to stone at the foot of the wooden stairs leading to the bell tower. Her eyes were fixed on the black iron door above, a place she had never thought about in the 10 years she had attended services here. Walter Sawyer, the young teacher in charge of the youth class, was the first to rush over. He was tall, with messy brown hair, having joined the parish less than a year ago, always loved for his approachable way of talking to children. When he heard that someone might be up in the tower, he didn't ask further. No hesitation. Ran. Thomas Piper also strode over, awkwardly holding a bunch of old keys. "We need to open the tower now," Sawyer said, his voice sharp. Piper shook his head, his face pale. I'm not sure. The key to the tower. I don't remember where I put it. It seems no one has used the tower since last year. You're the one who keeps all the keys." Piper looked around, his hands visibly trembling. Aunt Augusta came forward from behind, her voice choked. "Where's Mabel? They said they saw her up there. Please open it." The door was silent, as if trying to keep its secrets to itself. No one answered. No one dared to think the worst. But no one could deny that something was making the atmosphere thicken. Without waiting any longer, Sawyer bent down and took out a pair of bolt cutters from his pocket. something he often used when opening old storage for the kids to play drums. In one forceful snap, the lock popped open. The dry metallic sound echoed amidst the gasping breaths. The door opened. A thin layer of dust flew out from inside, mixing with the sunlight like smoke. Then, at the same time, a chaotic sound erupted. Pigeons. Dozens of pigeons flew out of the narrow doorway. The rustling of wings tore through the tense atmosphere. Someone screamed behind. Sawyer covered his face reflexively, then quickly stepped inside. The old wooden spiral staircase groaned under his footsteps. Piper stood below, not following. Aunt Augusta collapsed, gripping tightly the nearby bench. Wind began to whistle through the narrow doorway. Each wooden step seemed to groan under Sawyer's heavy footsteps. He gripped the handrail, trying to keep his balance, but cold sweat began to break out on the back of his neck. The smell of bird droppings, mildew, and rotting wood mixed together created an indescribable odor, as if the place had been forgotten for a long time. With each step higher, the fear inside him was shapeless, but so real that it was suffocating. This was no longer a sacred place, but an abandoned space where everything sacred was stifled by something unnameable. Below, Aunt Augusta still stood motionless, but her hands were bleeding because she had gripped the edge of the bench so tightly that her nails were digging into her skin. No one noticed. All eyes were focused on the bell tower, as if waiting for someone or something to come out. Another little girl hid behind her mother's skirt, whispering, "I saw Mr. Piper go up there on Wednesday." Her mother turned around abruptly. "What did you say?" The little girl pursed her lips, not saying anything more. But that sentence seemed to add another layer of coldness to the already thick atmosphere. Part 6. On the top floor, the space opened up unexpectedly. A dull wooden floor covered with a layer of light white dust. Dim light streamed through the cracks in the stone walls, creating oblique bands of light. And in the middle was Mabel. She lay on her side, the white dress with pink trim now dirty and wrinkled. One of her arms was bent at an unnatural angle. Her head was tilted to one side, a streak of blood spreading from her temple to the floor, drying in the cracks of the wood. Sawyer knelt down. He couldn't hear anything anymore. No birds, no footsteps, just an invisible silence weighing heavily on the space. His fingers trembled as he searched for a pulse on that small wrist. Still there. Very weak, but still there. "Ambulance! Call an ambulance!" he shouted, his voice breaking with panic. Just a few seconds later, his eyes stopped at an object nearby. Lying less than 2 steps away from Mabel, a wooden baseball bat, the end covered in white paint, speckled with unmistakable red spots. No one played baseball at this church. No sports team used the bell tower. No child was allowed up here. Sawyer stepped back, his eyes still fixed on the bat. A cold stream of thought ran down his spine. Then he looked around and realized that there were faint footprints in the dust, not just his, and not the shoes of a child. At the foot of the tower, as the ambulance arrived with sirens tearing through the afternoon, the whole church seemed to hold its breath. Mabel was carried down on a stretcher, needles inserted in her wrist, her face as white as paper. Aunt Augusta stepped forward, intending to take her hand, but stopped, afraid of hurting her. She just placed her hand on the edge of the stretcher, whispering, "Don't sleep, you hear? Don't sleep." In the midst of the hurried footsteps and the instructions of the medical staff, Sawyer stood silently. He wasn't crying, but in his eyes was a look of utter shock. He turned to look at Piper, the man still standing in the corner of the hallway, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly together. No one said anything. No one accused. But in Sawyer's eyes, the question had already appeared like a knife. Why is there a baseball bat in the bell tower? No one answered, but everyone knew, from that moment on, the sanctity of this place had been torn apart. The wind no longer blew, the birds no longer flew. Only a chilling silence remained, stretching from the highest floor of the church to the bottom of everyone's heart. Part 7. The closing of the emergency room doors behind the doctors marked the moment the outside world seemed to sink into absolute silence. No more sirens. No more hurried footsteps. Only the bright white light and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Emily sat on the long row of chairs opposite. Her back was against the wall, her hands clasped tightly, squeezing until they were purple. Her eyes were wide open, but empty. No tears. Not a prayer. Just a huge void in her chest expanding every second, about to explode. She didn't remember how she got here. Didn't remember what she shouted on the phone. Didn't remember who drove her. Just remembered that when she saw her daughter on the stretcher, blood in her hair, skin white and pale, she hadn't screamed. She just touched that small hand, cold and scary, and stood frozen. Aunt Augusta sat beside her, trembling, holding a damp, tear-stained handkerchief tightly. The grandfather leaned against the corner of the wall near the window. His hands shook, but still tried to open the small book, the children's Bible Mabel always carried, and turned to the page marked with a dried flower. His eyes stared at one passage. "He who loves the little sheep will seek it, though lost in the dark." His hand rested on the page, trembling slightly, but not turning further. He didn't need to read anymore, because the one who needed to hear would not read anymore. A nurse walked by. A doctor went in and out. A gurney glided through the hallway. Everything seemed to be floating in another dimension, where time stretched like rubber, and every sound was stifled. The emergency room door opened. A doctor came out, his white coat stained with a few dark blood spots. His face nodded slightly, without an expression. The mother didn't stand up. She just tilted her head, her voice small as a breath. "My daughter?" The doctor looked at her, a hint of weariness in his eyes. "We did everything we could." Something like shattering broke in the atmosphere. But no one cried out. No one lunged forward. No dramatic scenes like in movies. Just a complete collapse in silence. The mother slumped down onto her knees, her shoulders twitching. Not from crying, but as if her body was looking for a place to collapse. Aunt Augusta hugged her, crying like she had never cried before. Her mouth repeated over and over again, "No, it can't be. She just hugged me this morning. She just had breakfast." The grandfather still stood there, not saying anything, but his hands squeezed the book so hard that the cover tore at the corner. His eyes were still open, but seemed to have closed in another place, where he saw his granddaughter sitting on the balcony, asking about pigeons. In a corner of the hallway, a little girl, Mabel's classmate, was being held in her mother's arms. Her face was buried in her mother's shoulder, but her shoulders trembled with every beat. Aunt Augusta approached, gently asking, "What's wrong, sweetheart?" The little girl sobbed, "Why her? She was so good. She shared her snack with me. She tied other people's shoelaces. No one had an answer. And no one dared to say that sometimes in this world there is no reason at all. Part 8. Night fell slowly. Their small house now had no lights. Everything seemed to remain the same. The unwashed dishes on the sink, the rocking chair where the grandfather used to sit, the unfinished book lying face down on Mabel's bed. Emily came home near midnight, in a state like a sleepwalker. She didn't change her clothes, didn't shower, didn't eat. She just went into her daughter's room, turned on the nightlight, and stood looking. The pillow still bore the imprint of her small head. The teddy bear still lay tilted to one side as if waiting for someone to return. The white dress with pink trim carefully folded since yesterday still lay on the chair. She stepped forward, knelt down, and pressed her face into the pillow. Not crying, not moaning, only gasping breaths, rapid, as if her lungs no longer remembered how to breathe. Then, she whispered, a hoarse whisper. She was afraid of blood. She wouldn't dare to look every time I cut myself. She fainted from the needle. She was afraid. No one heard, but the walls, the teddy bear, and the nightlight silently witnessed, as if the whole room was holding its breath with her. Just then, at 12 o'clock at night, a faint sound echoed from afar. the ringing of the church bells. No one knew why it rang. Maybe someone was testing the bells. Maybe the wind made them touch each other. But the sound rang out, clear and cold, like a slap in the night. Emily didn't lift her head. She squeezed her hands on the pillow. In the other room, the grandfather sat on the rocking chair, the light from the hallway casting his shadow long and thin. The ringing echoed in his chest like nails being hammered in. Aunt Augusta had fallen asleep on the sofa, hugging the soaked handkerchief tightly. That night, no one in the house closed their eyes. No one called Mabel's name. No one mentioned the tower. No one talked about tomorrow. Only one thing that everyone knew, deep in the silence: everything had changed. Not just because Mabel was gone, but because the safety that had been absolutely trusted in the church, in the arms of adults, had shattered. Part 9. The first week after Mabel's death passed in a heavy silence. No one passed the church without bowing their head. No one saw the bell tower as before without averting their eyes. The name Thomas Piper was no longer just a name. It became a bleeding cut in every conversation, every morning news, every silent look between people who once thought they lived in a safe community. The police launched an urgent investigation. Piper's private room, located in the management area behind the tower, was sealed. They took away his old laptop, a few notebooks, a locked wooden box, and a stack of old children's magazines, all marked with pages that had pictures of little girls. The crowd didn't gather in front of the church, but every eye in the neighborhood watched it. No one spoke loudly, but whispers began to stick together like cobwebs. Things that used to be strange, eccentric, seemed not okay, now became a chain of accumulating evidence that no one had ever bothered to look at closely. Mr. Piper used to call me up to the tower and said he would show me pigeons, a 6-year-old boy said, eyes unblinking, voice unwavering, as if he had kept it too long, and now it was finally released. The mother turned to the investigator, clutching the hem of her shirt. I told the church. I said that he made my child uncomfortable, but they said, he's kind, just a little strange. The police officer nodded, but this time he didn't take notes. He looked up directly at the mother, his eyes like apologizing. He had heard that sentence 7 times in 3 days. Another little girl, about Mabel's age, sat in the interrogation room, her lips pursed, her hands clasped together. He just kept looking at us for a long time, didn't say anything, but we were scared. I told the teacher. She told me not to speculate. Part 10. Piper was arrested on the 4th night. When he was led away, he didn't react. His face was pale, silent, and terrifying. But as he stepped into the police car, he suddenly turned around, saying a short sentence, soft as a breath, just enough for a nearby reporter to hear. That girl was always looking up at the tower. Who told her to follow? That news spread faster than any news bulletin. And for the first time, the pain in Mabel's mother's heart turned into anger. She came to the police station the next morning, unannounced. No special requests. Just asked to see his face through the jail cell once. I don't need an explanation. I don't want an apology. I just want you to know that I saw you, not today, but a long time ago, through my daughter's eyes. Piper didn't answer. He turned his face away as if bored, but as she was about to turn away, he released a sentence, sarcastic, almost mocking. They trust people too much, and this world has no place for innocent fools. She looked straight at his back. No, there's no place for you. His computer was recovered. In the hidden drive were hundreds of encrypted files, photos taken secretly of girls from hidden angles, classroom doors, restrooms, hallways. A folder named Habits contained a list of short lines. Always go early, easy to talk, afraid of separating from the group, parents busy, polite but shy. In that list was Mabel's name. The note, goes with aunt, no father, likes pigeons, easy to approach. The last 2 words were underlined in red pen. In a closed meeting at the church, Mrs. Evelyn, an elderly parishioner, stood up, her voice hoarse as if she had run through many years of silence. I saw him grab a child's shoulder, tightly. Seeing it petrified, I turned away. I think, if I had spoken up that day, maybe Mabel would still be alive. No one answered. But the air in the room cracked like glass being scratched by stone. Everyone bowed their heads because everyone had seen something and had chosen to remain silent. At the police station, a young police officer whispered to his colleague, "If he had been accused since 2003, then who decided to keep him until now?" The colleague didn't answer, just looked at the file, then quickly flipped through the forgotten records. In a lower corner page, there was a handwritten note in faded red ink. "Accuser does not have enough evidence. Possible oversensitivity." Right below that line was the signature of a person who used to hold a high position on the church's board of directors. That person was now retired, living in another state. When the baseball bat was forensically examined, the results were clear. The blood on the bat matched Mabel's DNA sample. There was also hair, white and pink fabric, and a fingerprint that didn't belong to any member of the little girl's family. Needless to say, everyone knew whose fingerprint it was. Sawyer was the first to know. He left the interrogation room without saying a word, walked around Chester Park, then returned. That night, he wrote in his diary, "There were children who saw the truth, but adults didn't. There were voices that were never raised, not because there was no one to listen, but because no one wanted to believe." But there was still a question silently hovering in the thick air. Why Mabel? Why, of all the children who had been noticed by Piper, was Mabel the victim of such a brutal attack? No one could answer. In the police's internal investigation report, there was a note, unsigned, just a whisper copied from a child. Maybe because she was the one who smiled a lot and trusted people. Part 11. A week after the funeral, when things had temporarily calmed down, Mabel's mother sat in the living room, looking at the photo album on the table. On the cover was a line she had written in a childish scrawl, "The beautiful things I want to keep." There was a photo of her sitting under the bell tower. Sunlight streamed across her face, and she was smiling, a bright smile without hesitation. She reached out, touching the photo lightly, as if wanting to stroke back time. But her fingers only brushed the cold glass. She didn't ask why anymore. She just wanted the small voices, once ignored, would never be ignored again. A week, 2 weeks. By the third week, the Sunday services still didn't take place. The parishioners who had been attached to the church for life began to feel lost. Not because they missed the habit of praying, but because faith, something invisible, but as closely linked as breath, had cracked. Many families began to hesitate to bring their children to church. Some moved to another chapel. Some stayed silently at home. And some began to ask questions. On Tuesday afternoon, in the church's board of directors meeting room, the atmosphere was so oppressive that a clock falling from the wall could have startled people. But there was no sound, just a broken voice. "We need to take that photo down." The speaker was Mrs. Wilma, who had been in charge of the children's program for 12 years. Her voice trembled, but her eyes looked straight at the photo of Piper still hanging on the church's honor board, which celebrated those who served devotedly for the young generation. A middle-aged man protested, "Taking it down is easy. But how do we explain it to people? This image used to be printed in the magazine. The press can make headlines anytime." Another person chimed in, "I don't care about the press. I care about my children and the children of others." The meeting gradually turned into an argument. No one wanted to take responsibility. No one dared to admit that they had been silent when they heard whispers from the children. Words that had been called sensitive, fabricated, childish imagination. In the meantime, the old pastor, who had placed his hand on Mabel's head when she was baptized, still sat silently at the end of the table. His face was older than his real age, his eyes as cloudy as winter lake water. When everyone stopped in exhaustion, he slowly stood up. "I no longer have the right to guide anyone." Someone started to interrupt, but he raised his hand. I had heard, had felt something unusual, but I didn't do anything. I prayed, but I didn't act, and that is the biggest mistake of my life. He removed the cross on his neck, placing it on the table. "I resign, and I will not beg for forgiveness. I will live to endure it." No one said anything, because everyone understood. There are apologies that come after the truth, can no longer redeem anything, but still need to be said so that no one will be silent again. The next day, in the letters to the editor section of a local newspaper, appeared an unsigned letter. The handwriting was slanted evenly, carefully, and full of remorse. I used to have doubts. My daughter told me that Piper made her afraid. I hesitated, thinking it probably wasn't that bad. And then I remained silent. I thought I was protecting my child, but in fact, I helped push another child to her death. I write these lines not to justify myself, but to say to those who are silent, listen to your children. Listen to the smallest voices, because my silence took away the smile of a little girl who was not my own. That letter was printed verbatim, without editing a word. It was circulated in the community like a bell without a bell ringing. In the house behind the church, where there were usually weekend activities for children, the classroom was empty. Chairs were still arranged in straight rows. Wall paintings had faded. On the whiteboard was still written the words from the last lesson. "Do what is right, even if no one sees." Mabel's mother didn't return to church, didn't appear publicly. She didn't want to face the hugs, the condolences. No matter how sincere, could not reach where the real wound lay. She lived quietly, picking up and dropping off students in the public school near her home, and refused all interviews. But once, a student said that her new homeroom teacher had taught a special lesson, not in the curriculum, about listening to what no one wants to hear. And at the end of the lesson, she just said, "Silence can kill." Quietly. One day in the middle of the month, the church reopened. No official announcement. Just a few people quietly walked in, lit candles, then left. On the honor board, Piper's photo was gone. Instead was a small handwritten piece of paper. "We were wrong, and this time, we will not ignore it again." Outside, a group of children played on the lawn in front of the yard. They didn't know much. They laughed and ran as usual. Only a little girl about 7 years old, when looking up at the bell tower, suddenly asked her mother, "Mom, is it still dangerous up there?" The mother paused. She didn't know how to answer. Then, after a moment, she bent down, took her daughter's hand. "No, honey. As long as adults don't close their eyes anymore. Faith doesn't disappear in a day, but it cannot return in one morning." That community understood that. They cannot change the past, but they can stop a future from repeating it. And sometimes, to protect a child, you don't have to be strong. Just dare to speak up. Part 12. In March 2007, the trial of Thomas Piper officially began at the district court in the north. The press came from everywhere. Cameras, microphones, photos. Everything formed a cold shell around a pain that no longer had a shape. Piper entered the courtroom in a gray jumpsuit, his hair grayer than the day he was arrested. His eyes scanned the courtroom without wavering. No remorse, no fear, no sign of the human being who once knelt in the church he had served. In the back row, a few families whose children had attended War Street Church sat silently. Their faces were pale, not from anger but from cold. Cold to the bone. Cold as if they were waiting not for justice, but for a way to name the pain that had been buried for too long. Mabel's family wasn't present. Only their legal representative sent an apology for absence due to health reasons. But those in the courtroom understood. It was the right to remain silent of those who were too hurt to hear again what they already knew too well. The first day of the trial opened with Piper's denials. His voice was flat, monotone, as if reading the weather forecast. "I don't know why I'm here. I don't remember anything. I have never been up the bell tower with anyone." A mother sitting near the door covered her mouth, not to cry, but to stop the hysterical laughter from escaping. His defense attorney gave the reason unstable mental condition, citing psychological records from over a decade ago. They tried to cling to every smallest crack to regain some humanity, but all efforts fell apart as evidence began to be released. The investigating police presented details, matching DNA, dried blood, torn fragment of the dress, photos hidden in a secret folder. All appeared like undeniable shadows, even when the defendant tried to close his eyes. And then came the most painful part of the trial, testimony from other girls. No one cried, no one screamed, just stories told in a whisper, each word like a cut into the already dense atmosphere. "I remember he said if I told, God would be sad. I didn't dare tell my mom. I thought I had done something wrong. I saw Mabel that day, but I didn't stop her. I thought he was a good person." The children sat there, small and thin, in simple clothes and eyes bigger than their age. Every word they spoke was like an indictment to all the adults who had heard but not believed, had seen but not asked, had suspected but not acted. The trial lasted 9 days. On the 8th day, as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict, Piper suddenly asked for permission to speak. The courtroom went silent. He stood up, looked straight ahead, for the first time not turning away when mentioning Mabel's name. Then he said, slowly, "I did it. Not just with that girl, but with many other children. Since 2002. I don't want to be forgiven. I just can't stand pretending anymore." No one applauded. No one burst into tears. Just a heavy silence enveloped the entire courtroom, a moment where the truth was revealed, not to acquit, but so that no one could turn back. Outside the courthouse, while the trials were taking place, people gathered in increasing numbers. They didn't carry banners, didn't shout, just stood, silently. Some people held candles, some held photos of their children, those who had attended the church, now grown up, but still carrying a story that had never been fully told. A father who had been a close friend of Piper's in his youth told a reporter, "I used to think he was just eccentric. Now I have to teach my children that. Trusting people is good, but don't be silent when you see something wrong." In the courtroom, Piper's defense attorney, a man nearing 60 years old, bowed his head when his client confessed. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, then looked towards the girls who had testified. His face at that moment was no longer that of someone doing a job, but that of a father facing the fear that he had protected the wrong person. Behind, Walter Sawyer, the young teacher who had carried Mabel down from the bell tower, sat silently listening. When he heard Piper confess, he bowed his head slightly, not to celebrate, but as if whispering something to a child that he had not protected in time. Part 14. On sentencing day, Mabel's mother didn't come to court, but sent a handwritten letter to the judge. The letter was read publicly, not with anger, nor with the intention of condemning. The clerk's voice read slowly, clearly, as if afraid of breaking something very fragile in each line. "I am not writing this letter to express hatred. I was once so angry that I wanted him to disappear from this world. But then I realized, if I keep holding on to that anger, then my daughter will never rest in peace. I forgive. Not for him, but so that my daughter doesn't have to witness any more anger. Mabel deserves to live in the memory of love, not of hatred." It was said that some people shed tears, not because of emotion, but because they felt small in front of a mother who had lost everything, but still chose not to let the pain turn into hatred. Thomas Piper was sentenced to life in prison without parole. No one celebrated. No one said, "Justice has been served." Because justice, in this case, was not an ending. It was just a moment for the truth to be spoken by its real name, and sometimes that alone is the only way for those who are still alive to begin to move on. In the spring of 2010, exactly 4 years after that fateful afternoon, War Street Baptist Church opened for a special service. No banners, no press releases. No one was officially invited except for a few longtime members of the parish council and families with young children who had attended the church. On the lawn in front, a few wooden chairs were arranged in rows. The sky was cloudy but not cold. No one wore black. No one brought flowers. There were no tears or sighs. Just voices whispered lightly like the wind, and the footsteps of children gliding lightly on the old stone. Mabel's mother entered the church at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. She wore a light gray coat, her hair neatly tied back, holding the hands of 4 children, first graders she was teaching. No one asked why she brought them. Everyone understood. She had never returned to this church since the day her daughter was carried down from the bell tower, not out of hatred nor out of fear, but because she needed time to know that she would not see this place as a place of sin, but as a place where there had once been her daughter's smile. Part 15. The new bell had been mounted on the tower at the end of last month. Each stage was done by hand, from casting the bronze to engraving the name. There were no patterns, no religious symbols. Only a single line was delicately engraved below. "Mabel, we remember you." The young pastor, who replaced the old one after he resigned, led the service. He didn't read the Bible, didn't preach, just said a few short sentences. "This bell is not for announcing services. It will not be rung on Sundays. It will only ring on occasions when we need to remember that we were once in pain, but have learned to move on." Then he stepped back, inviting the mother to come forward. She held the microphone with both hands. A small hand squeezed her hem lightly from behind. It was Emma, a shy first-grade student who had just learned to read. She placed her hand on the little girl's head, then smiled. "I didn't come here to repeat the past. What needed justice has been done, but I still owe my daughter one thing: to tell you about Mabel, not as a victim, but as a child." She looked down at the children sitting in the front row. Their eyes were wide. Their hands were still holding the cookies handed out at the gate. Mabel was the little girl who liked to help her friends tie their shoelaces, even though she tied them very clumsily. She used to cut her snack in half and share it with her friend who ate slowly, and she believed that if she disappeared, her mother would search for her whole life. Her voice didn't tremble, didn't break, just even, small, as if telling a bedtime story. Mabel was afraid of blood, afraid of needles, afraid of balloons exploding. But she was never afraid of other people. She paused. A few people bowed their heads. No one cried. But some pursed their lips very tightly, then silently nodded as if holding that story in their hearts. When it was time, the pastor gave the signal. A white string was pulled lightly. The bell rang. The first sound didn't echo, just a small ting, as if touching a memory. But then the bell rang out very far, echoing in the air, over the roofs, over the red brick walls, spreading out to Chester Park, where there was an old maple tree where Mabel used to sit reading with her grandfather. As soon as the bell rang for the first time, a gentle breeze swept through the churchyard. The children looked up, some whispering, "This doesn't sound like other bells." A little girl named Lucy, 6 years old, asked, "Why is it sad but beautiful?" The question was not answered, but an old woman standing behind smiled, wiped her eyes lightly, then whispered to her husband, "Because it was cast from tears." The young pastor, after the service, went to each child and gave each of them a small wooden badge, a bell engraved with the name Mabel. Not for you to wear for beauty, but to remember, if a friend is not safe, you are the first to have to speak up. The children didn't understand everything, but took it with both hands. Some turned it over, some pressed it to their chests, as if afraid of dropping something important. In the distance, The bell still rang one more time. This time, no one pulled the string. The wind blew, making the bell ring softly, enough for someone to look up and believe that sometimes what rings out is not from stone and steel, but from memory. A little boy whispered, "How long will that bell ring?" The mother replied, still looking up at the tower, "As long as people remember to be kind to each other." Part 16. At the end of the service, each child was given a piece of paper, drawing of a bell and the line, "We will not be silent anymore." There were no flowers on the altar, but someone had quietly placed a pair of small white shoes, tied with pink laces, right in front of the steps of the bell tower. The laces were tied, neatly, straight, as if tied by a child who had learned to do it right after many attempts. The mother saw it. She walked over, didn't touch it, just stood there. And for the first time in 4 years, she smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who has reached the bottom of loss and still chooses to move on, to retell a story that doesn't end with death, but with continuation. That bell didn't talk about the past. It just whispered, "We have lost a child, but we will not lose another." The new school year began with sunlight slanting through the windows of the children's classroom at War Street Baptist Church, the room renovated from an old classroom behind the row of red brick hallways. Paintings hung on the walls, small chairs arranged in a circle, a low wooden shelf in the book corner, where children's Bibles lay neatly next to fairy tales and coloring books. The teacher that day was a woman in her 30s, white shirt, hair neatly tied behind her neck. She didn't introduce herself much, just bent down with gentle eyes and a voice as warm as breath. "I am Miss Emily, and I am here to listen to you." A little boy raised his hand, his eyes wide. "Teacher, does our bell tower now have anything on top of it?" The whole class turned to look out the window, where the bell tower still stood tall, covered with a new layer of time, no longer a forbidden place, nor a place to be forgotten. Emily looked in that direction. She didn't avoid it, nor did she shed tears, just smiled, lightly like the wind. There is a little bird. It often sits there every morning, and when the bell rings, it will take off, flying very high, then returning, as if it wants to remind us that each new day is an opportunity to be better than yesterday. The children didn't ask further. They nodded, as if they understood, as if they didn't, but reassured, because the adults had not avoided it. During recess, a little girl named Lily was led into the class. She was new, small, with messy curly hair, her face still with traces of tears not completely dry. The teacher approached, kneeling down to eye level. "Hello, I'm Emily. Here, you are allowed to speak when you are afraid. And when you are sad, here, you are safe." Lily looked up, blinked twice, then nodded slightly, took her hand, not letting go. In the corner of the class, a little boy was tying a friend's shoelaces. The laces were loose, tangled. He awkwardly twisted his hands, tried twice before succeeding. His friend smiled. "Thank you. You tied it terribly." The boy replied without looking up. "My mom said helping doesn't need to be perfect, just sincere." Emily turned to look, a small moment but deep as a wave, because that was what Mabel used to do. Part 17. At the end of the lesson, the whole class stood in a circle, holding hands and singing the song, "This Little Light of Mine." Children's voices rang out thinly but fully, each word stretching through the fresh air of the late afternoon. When the last verse ended, a gentle breeze swept through the yard, and then, like an appointment without prior notice, the Mabel bell rang. No one pulled the string. No one went up the tower. No, the wind just blew lightly, then echoed the round and clear bell like a whisper. I didn't live to become an angel, but I made the world know how to protect other little angels. Emily smiled, not sadly, not rigidly, but lightly, as if finally she had understood. One early day in June, when the weather had not yet fully entered summer, Mabel's mother opened an old drawer in her daughter's room. The third drawer, on the left, still smelled of old paper, damp wood, and a hint of sunshine drying blankets years ago. In it, she kept a few things: a hair bow with frayed edges, an unfinished coloring picture, and a children's Bible with a spine that was torn in places. Between pages 47 and 48, there was a piece of paper folded 4 times, a handwritten letter, yellowed at the edges, written in purple ink, leaning slightly like the wind blowing through young grass. She had written it 3 years after Mabel's death. Not sent, not read to anyone. Just kept it, as a way to remind herself that memory can be silent, but never disappears. To my Mabel, I know you can't read these lines, but I still write, like the way you used to write letters and stick them on the mirror. Mom, I did it today. Me too. Today I did it. I walked into the classroom without collapsing when I saw a little girl smiling like you. I told my students about courage, and for the first time didn't stutter when mentioning you. I have learned how to sleep when you are not resting your head on my arm every night. I want to tell you about the other children. There is a child who used to be afraid, now knows how to say no when they feel unsafe. There is a child who knows how to tie shoelaces for a friend, like you used to do, clumsy but kind. There is a child who used to cry every time they were scolded, now dares to speak up for their friend. They live, and live with a part of the light that you left behind. If you were still alive, maybe you would be in 3rd grade. Maybe you would like math like Grandpa, or like to draw like Aunt Augusta. Maybe you would be taller than me. Maybe you would have a younger brother or sister. Maybe you would tie shoelaces better, know how to hide snacks in your bag to share with your friends, and still ask questions that make me laugh like the old days. If you were still alive, maybe I would still be an ordinary teacher. Maybe the church would not have hung the bell with your name. Maybe we would never know. How much loss can teach people to grow. But honey, even though you are not alive, the children who remained lived in your place. The Mabel bell still rings whenever someone needs a reminder about kindness. The small stories about you, about a girl who shared snacks, tied shoelaces, liked to ask questions that were hard to answer, are still being told. And the strange thing is, when I tell them, no one cries anymore. They just smile, like you used to smile with your whole eyes. Love you forever, Mom. She folded the letter carefully as if holding something that was still breathing. Then put it back in its original position between the pages with the verse, I knew you before you were formed. She didn't close the drawer immediately. She just stood there so that her hand could still touch something soft and warm, even after all these years. A ray of sunlight slanted through the window, falling on the tiled floor, creating a light yellow diagonal, just like the morning of long ago when Mabel used to sit here reading a book, her legs swinging, her eyes sparkling with a naive question. Mom, do angels know how to tie shoelaces? She didn't answer then. And maybe, now she doesn't need to answer anymore. That afternoon, she taught again. Still new children, new faces, new names. But somewhere in every laugh, every question, every surprised look that turned back, there was still Mabel, not as a ghost, but as light shining through the window, illuminating the stone floor. Silent, but there. At the end of the lesson, the Mabel bell rang again. No one pulled it. No one went to the tower. The wind just blew lightly, then echoed the round and clear bell like a whisper. I didn't live to become an angel, but I made the world know how to protect other little angels. Emily smiled, not sadly, not rigidly, but lightly, as if finally she had understood.